From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
For those of you just joining us, we had an incredibly stimulating morning this morning and a wonderful keynote. And this afternoon, we're going to begin to hear from creators. And before I say that, I just want to also, again, thank the Center for the Protection of Intellectual Property. And over here, you'll see very intelligent, energetic-looking students. And I think, if you don't mind, I think they're our future, and I'd like to recognize them for helping us to put this on today. I also want to make a point to thank John Conyers, who is the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. When I testified before the committee in favor of a comprehensive review of copyright law, the Copyright Office made the point that no such review would be complete without looking at moral rights. And John Conyers, who has been a lifelong advocate of authors and artists, asked us formally to commence such a study. So as we said this morning, this symposia, co-sponsored with George Mason Law School, is the beginning of that public dialogue. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kim Isbell, who is Senior Counsel in our Department of Policy and International Affairs.
Thanks, Maria. As Maria just alluded to, one of the key things about this panel that I think is really interesting is it's the first opportunity to really hear from the artists themselves. This morning we heard from a lot of lawyers talking about what moral rights the United States does or doesn't recognize, how you could assert moral rights under various provisions of U.S. law, and then the very interesting keynote by Professor Ginsburg talking about what she views as a very important moral right, the right of attribution, and how we could go about codifying it. But this panel is really focused on what do artists themselves think? How do moral rights impact their day-to-day work? How do they impact them both professionally and personally? Which moral rights do they care about? Which moral rights make their lives easier or more difficult? And so for that reason, I'm going to take a slightly different approach to this panel than we have in the prior panels. I'm not going to start off asking our panelists a bunch of questions. Instead, I want to give each of them about 5 minutes to really talk to you from their own perspective as to what moral rights and what this symposium mean to them and what they think should be the key takeaways as the Copyright Office is going into a larger study of the issue of moral rights. Before I do that, though, I'm just quickly going to introduce our panel, and then I'm going to turn the microphone over to Melvin. Our first speaker is Melvin Gibbs. He's a musician, bassist, composer, general musician, Renaissance man. He's also the president of the Content Creators Coalition, who is really out there advocating for artists in the area of copyright and in other areas. And so we're very glad he could come down from New York to join us. Next to him is David Lowery. He's a songwriter. He's a recording artist. You've probably heard of some of his bands. He was in Cracker and Camper Van Beethoven. And he also helped found Pitch a Tent Records. He's been a frequent speaker for artists' rights in many of these discussions that most of us participate in. He's a very strong advocate for the rights of composers and the rights of recording artists in the United States. Next to him is Yoko Miyashita? Miyashita, sorry, I apologize. She's Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Getty Images, came to us all the way from Seattle to join us today, so we're very glad she could be here. Next to her is Professor Sean O'Connor. He is the Boeing International Professor at the University of Washington Law School. We actually have a number of Seattleites on the panel today. And he's done extensive research in the area of moral rights and copyright. And finally, last but definitely not least, is Scott Turow. He is an attorney and an author. He's written 9 best-selling books. And has also been very active in these issues. And so I personally am really looking forward to hearing from all of our panelists. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melvin.
Good afternoon. Howdy. I was about to use Kimberly, but is it more, should I be saying Ms. Isbell in this context?
Kimberly.
You know, all right, so I'm going to say Kimberly. So, you know, I'm trying to get with the protocol here. Anyway, as Kimberly said earlier, there was a lot of talk about the law and the intricacies of the law. I'm a musician. We think about the law as part of a more holistic way we think about the world. For me personally, in addition to thinking about the law, when I have to think about it, I think about what my music means philosophically and what it means economically. And once I start thinking about music, you know, you have to start thinking about how you translate it. And then it becomes a question of thinking about metaphors. And as musicians, we're basically stuck in 2 metaphors. We're stuck in the metaphor where we're workers, we're making a musical work, or we are employees creating a product. For me, neither one of those things actually works. I actually think of myself as part of a community and creating for a community. And in the context of this society, the goal seems to be dissemination of creativity, getting it out to as many people as possible. And the question becomes, for somebody like me who's a creative, is how am I going to make that process work? Leaving aside the kind of inherent, you know, heteronormative male aspect of the word dissemination, you have the question of you have the question of what does that mean? There has to be, the dissemination is a process that starts from an individual to another individual. So inherently, for the dissemination process to work, the individual has to be recognized. So how that works in the context of the community is very simple. You know who the guy down the street is who does X, Y, or Z. You know, for us as musicians, there might have been a guy. For me, there was literally the man who lived next door who taught me who started me off on music. The question becomes, I needed to know who this person was. In the context of a community, of course you're going to know that. But in the context of 2016, when we have aggregated groups of data, it becomes difficult to impossible to know who these individuals are unless there is some mechanism specifically built to make that happen. So looking at the idea of moral rights in the context of this society today, I would say to have this balance between community and individual, it's actually more important than ever. To have a really large-scale dissemination of creativity, the individual creators have to be recognized. All right. Somebody asked why is the law necessary in the earlier panel. To answer that, I'll give an experience. I've been consulting at a startup for the past few months, almost a year now. And one of the things I've learned is that nothing gets built at a startup unless it is absolutely necessary for it to exist. And the reasons that it's necessary to exist are basically only 2. There has to be a business reason or there has to be a legal or regulatory reason. It will not get built because I want it to. There has to be some affirmative reason that the tech community has to do this. So that's my short answer to that. For us, attribution, that is our currency. I don't exist if people don't know who I am. I mean that in the most literal sense of I don't eat. So every time something goes out that I've participated in that I don't get attribution for, it affects my family. And how that affects the community is that the less I am able to create, the less I am able to help other people create. And the less the community of, it shrinks the community of artists, which will eventually shrink the creativity of this country as a whole. I don't have a watch on. I don't know how I'm going here.
1 more minute.
Okay. There is a bit of an overlap between economic use and moral use, which I guess we'll get into later. But I can speak as somebody who's mentored by a lot of the older jazz musicians in New York City that you cannot really separate them. There are a lot of things that attribution and integrity are both important. And for us as musicians, it's a slightly different issue because we're performers. It's not like in a book where you have one version of the book. We play a song today, we'll play it again tomorrow. Each performance is unique. And each performance can be disseminated on its own. So I think there's room for a different way of thinking about this idea that integrity will somehow hinder the process of remix culture. I think that this was something we'll examine further, but I just want to touch on that right now.
Okay, thank you, Melvin. David Lowery?
Thank you, Melvin. About 23 years ago, I had a song released, and it started to become popular on radio. One day I get a call from the senior vice president of promotions at the record label, and he basically says, that song's not about being stoned, right? I'm like, of course it's about being stoned, Michael. But he's kept saying it to me, and then finally I was like, oh, is there a problem? He goes, yeah, I got this letter I want you to sign, and I need to fax it to a few radio stations. So despite the fact that I signed a letter that said the song Low which has a chorus, hey, 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 like being stoned, is about being stoned. Despite the fact that I essentially signed a letter that said that it didn't, it is. And I guess in the world of alternative rock and rock radio, songs about being stoned, there are a couple other people who have a few tracks that basically come out and say that. And one of them, of course, is Tom Petty. So about the time that we were first dealing with digital distribution, at first involuntarily by the likes of Napster and Kazaa and Grokster and things like that, somebody, probably because they were stoned, mislabeled my song Low as being a Tom Petty song called like Being Stoned.mp3 or Tom Petty-Low-106. I guess 108. It must have been an MP3 disc that they ripped it from. And for the next 6 or 7 years, I had this ongoing battle to kind of correct this misrepresentation that that was actually a Tom Petty song, to the point where, what's the name of this website? Well, I mean, and it's still out there. Like, if you look it up on Last FM, it says it's a Tom Petty song. Picture of Tom Petty there. There's a Wikia called Misattributed, and then the Wikia Misattributed song, that's one of the first examples of song being misattributed to artists. So you got to think about this. So my point, and I think there's a lot of people here that feel the same way, is that attribution, you can't really separate attribution from the economic rights, right? I mean, it's the same thing. Now, we can decide what we're going to do about that, because the last thing I want is DMCA loophole that you can drive like a truck or several thousand trucks through. But it is definitely, just to look at attribution as separate from an economic right is ridiculous because one, all those people who are freely downloading those songs, well, maybe they would have come to the concert, but they would have gone to a Tom Petty concert. Also, the fact is when you're a performer, you build up a certain brand name on the basis of your previous albums. So even before your album comes out, it gets a value, an economic value, because it's going to be, based on the popularity of the songs before that, more people are going to listen to it, maybe buy it, get licensed in films. I mean, it's silly that it's not an economic right. Or that we would even think that it's not an economic right. And I guess the other thing is that, I find there's a lot of, you have this problem built into our system for songwriters. Like my example is a funny example as a performer, but when you look at songwriters, they're almost never attributed in the digital world. I mean, I guess you can dig around. I was using a popular streaming service, and they do have a lyrics plugin that you can load into the program, and then you click on lyrics for one of my songs. It was being performed by another band, but this is a song I wrote, and I looked at the lyrics and stuff, and I was like, that's great. There's the lyrics, and that's attributed to the wrong people as a writer. So, I guess that's my point. It's an economic issue, very strongly.
Okay, thank you. Now to go to Yoko to give us sort of the business perspective on this.
No, it's great to follow Melvin and David. Thank you for that context, because definitely touches on a number of things that we see in my industry. So just a little background on Getty Images. We represent close to 200,000 individual photographers, as well as having a staff of 150 staff photographers. So we're both stewards and distributors of third-party content, as well as owners and generators of our own content. And, I was thinking about this as you were talking about these issues, and I've been with Getty for about 11 years, and I would split those years as sort of pre-viral, pre-social to the current state. And I would look at sort of our activities, particularly on the enforcement side, as seeing instances of uses and policing them, and realizing with online platforms, with the DMCA loopholes, that just simply became untenable. So Getty really looked at this as a business issue because, when the genie's out of the bottle on social media, it's out. There is no stuffing it back in. And the big issue we encounter here, particularly on images, is when it's what I call the right-click copy upload paradigm. When that happens, the metadata that, we have hired people to apply all of the author's information, the copyright information, all of those attributes that would ordinarily travel with an image get stripped. So what happens? That image gets orphaned. That information you would have had about that author. Not only has that been infringed, not only has your economic right there been messed with, it's now been disconnected from the key information that tells you who actually created that image, who is the author behind that. So it's an issue that we have looked at from a business perspective and said, all right, this is happening. You could send all the takedown notices in the world and you will never solve this issue. So what have we done as a company is really looked at ways of distributing content to actually bring attribution back. How do you leverage this innate human need to share images? Well, you do that by offering embed. In May of 2014, we launched an offering through our website for free use free embed use for non-commercial purposes. We had spent years pursuing these small nonprofit organizations, school projects, and really that is a terrible PR campaign. They really whacking the school teachers over the head with a CAD and a lawsuit or demand for payment, really not great for company PR. Not great for us. So what did we say? We opened up 90+% of our collections and said, if you want to use our content for non-commercial use, great. Here's our embed. And what does it do? It includes a small watermark as well as attribution. Give the creators credit for what they've done. But it also links back to our site. So if someone actually goes through that, likes that picture, they can go through, then make their way back to the Getty Images site, explore more images by a particular photographer. Soon after embed, we've launched social sharing. So if you now go to the Getty Images website and see a picture you like, we encourage you to share it, but it will be shared with attribution, a link back wherever those platforms allow us. So you can correlate that back to the person who created it. I'm not saying this is the ideal solution, but this is the solution that we currently have in the context of where the legal framework stands. If it's going to be shared, we want it to be shared with attribution, with a possible and potential for people to find more images from these creators. The other thing that we, one of our affiliates, Getty Images, acquired a technology in 2011. It was the front runner in image recognition software. They do digital fingerprinting and essentially help you identify images on the internet. You can see the obvious use cases for pursuing infringements. But what we've done is really collected one of the largest indices of online imagery. So fantastic solution for orphan works, but also just an open API. So the technology is out there to help platforms, to help companies, to help anyone who's looking figure out who actually created an image, who actually owns the copyright, where it's available for licensing. This technology exists, it's out there, we offer it, but there needs to be an impetus to drive uptake of these kinds of available technologies. We know they exist, they are underutilized across the industry. But again, that is a process to reattach this attribution, to reattach the metadata, to reattach all of these key attributes that go directly into the economic viability of creative works. I wanted to touch on a point you made, David, about to have, it's not just knowing who the author is so you can search. This is all driven in the platform space by algorithms. If your name is not showing up with that song and is not being attributed to you, everything else that's driving the algorithms that will drive traffic back to you or discovery of your content, those connections are being cut off. So I do see these as absolutely interrelated, and you cannot separate the two. I think that's really it for me.
That good?
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Okay, I'm actually going to use a timer because I'll just ramble on too long. First, I want to clarify that I'm not really a moral rights expert. I know that's shocking, and I probably shouldn't be up here. I always joke that I'm jack of all trades, master of none. I was a singer-songwriter for a long time, but not as good as these gentlemen. Recorded some stuff, did get some airplay, but I was one of those guys who was better as a bar band performer, and would go into the studio, and it was pretty good in the studio, the stuff I wrote, but not good enough to quite get me there. So after that, I went and got a master's in philosophy, was a bartender, parked cars, did every stupid job you could imagine. And then ultimately ended up in law school for various reasons. And through the magic of academic tenure, I've held a job for like 13 years now, which is really quite good for me. But thank you. I know my parents are still shocked that that's happening. So, so I think the only reason I'm here is kind of as perhaps a synthesizer, looking at both the, creator side, because I've experienced that. I know what it takes not only to write songs, but also to get them into the studio. Again, I wasn't good at it, but I understood the production process. And what I liked about what Melvin was saying was distinguishing between musicians in their performance capacity and in their recording capacity. And so I think with moral rights, and what I just want to address for a couple of minutes here, is that the key thing is when we're focused on musicians and other creators when they're creating what I'll call artifacts, a particular finished work, okay, a recorded song, a book that's going to be published, okay, an artwork that's going to be released. And then the key is, and it's related to a project I'm working on right now, funded by CPIP actually, looking at arguing that copyright should perhaps be viewed as much an incentive for publication, for making a public commitment to that particular vision of a creative work, as it is an incentive for creativity and the other things we normally say. Why? Well, because if you talk to a bunch of creators, and now Melvin and Dave will correct me quickly on this, but I don't think you guys don't write songs just because there's copyright. You don't create just, well, maybe you do, I don't know. So in other words, did you say, oh my gosh, I am not going to become a songwriter if there were not copyright?
Yeah, but I don't think you do album 8 or 9.
True, right. So there's a role for it, right? Exactly. So, and then the question becomes, how you get it all financed. But the point here is that I think a lot of people now realize that copyright is only an incentive to create, probably doesn't tell the whole story. It's a big part of the story, but it's not the complete story. And so if you look at the history of the term publication, going back to the Roman period, publicare, it was making a public commitment. And so what I think is become invisible to us in the social media age, where people blur the line between public and private. We tweet everything out, we Instagram everything out, Snapchat everything out. But think about if you are a creator, and this is as true for creative artists and even for us wonky academics, when you finally say, and looking at the journal students over there, okay, you guys, and I have stuff I've published with them, they always send me, is it final? Are you going to give us the sign off? Can we publish this now? That's a fraught moment, because if I say something wrong in there, I didn't catch a typo, it comes back to haunt me. And so now in the performance side and the improv side, sometimes the rough edges around it can be exactly what you want, but in the finished artifact side, it's often not what you want. Or you're trying to get a very particular thing. So what does this mean for moral rights? Well, first, moral rights is important because we angst a lot about, is it good enough to be published, to be publicly released? And second, without getting too maudlin, but in the world we live in today, you have a lot of potential risk and liability for things you publicly put out there as creators. Right? We don't have to give specific examples, but just think about that in the world today. And so the notion of integrity, what if somebody takes my carefully constructed, here's what I really meant to put out there, and they change it, and my name is still on it. And now suddenly that could get me just professional problems, or it could get me physical harm kind of problems. Can't I then get my name taken off it? Or can I just withdraw the work entirely if I realize that's not what I want to publicly commit to anymore? Okay, so that's my main point. Second point is that I think, and I like that Professor Ginsburg was starting to open up that door and talk about work made for hire, because that's going to be, I think, one of the biggest problems for meshing in or bringing in a full moral rights system into the U.S. copyright system. Our work made for hire is based on the economic basis of our copyright system. So it means the economic employer can be the author for purposes of copyright statute. But if there's another sense of work made for hire where you have, and this goes back to actually, continental precedents, going back into the Renaissance period, where you have the great artiste who directs people in usually then his, but it could be her studio, and they actually implement, they execute on things. So, we know the cases about how you decide who's an author and who's not, but that's going to become, I think, incredibly important as you think about then bringing in a fuller moral rights system, if that's something we want to do. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott.
Oh, great. Well, thank you all. My acquaintance with moral rights began what is now a long time ago when I was thrilled to get a draft of a movie contract for the rights to Presumed Innocent. And my life had gone through an extraordinary transformation. I had written Presumed Innocent on the morning commuter train, finished it in my basement, and all of a sudden, literally, I was that proverbial person in the creative world who gets struck by lightning. And in the process, the movie rights to the book were purchased. Draft contract arrives, and of course it says that among the rights I am selling are my right to make a claim based on droit moral, or I'm sure people are fainting all over the room of my French accent, but or moral rights. And so I called my lawyer and I said, well, what are moral rights? And he said, well, it has nothing to do with you. You're an American. But I've always been conscious of the concept just because, I'd been through law school. I've never took a copyright class, but the notion, just because of the term, appealed to me. And we recognize creative work as standing on some kind of different platform than other products in the marketplace because of the intimacy of the creative act. And for lack of any other term, artists traditionally are believed to have put a little bit of their soul into whatever they create, whether it's what they paint or the songs they compose, the sculptures they make, or for artists and authors, the productions that come from them. And I think we do have the right to assert that there is a kind of specialness in creative work, and that is recognized in terms of moral rights. Everybody here has talked generally about the right of attribution. I sit here on what is a sad day for the Authors Guild, of which I was once president. Our long-running fight with Google over the Google Books project is officially over today. The Supreme Court refused to grant cert in the case. And I doubt there are any people in the room who need a long-winded explanation of what was involved in the Google Books case. And it's certainly true that our opposition was fundamentally economic, the notion that a large corporate entity could decide on its own to take and copy an author's work, not change a single word of it, offer no new expression, and still make the entire work available through selective display of so-called snippets, seemed fundamentally wrong. But we've lost that fight. But the moral rights issues still remain in that discussion. Just by way of example, at one point we had reached a settlement with Google, which was one of those situations where the Justice Department came in and disagreed with both sides. And I still, of course, disagree with the Justice Department about this. But we found in our own membership substantial opposition to the settlement, not overriding, and what were they objecting to? They believed they didn't like the idea of Google coming in and just taking their work. They didn't want it displayed on Google. And even though we argued that the settlement, in fact, would give them the right to opt out and withdraw their work, they found it fundamentally offensive. Now, songwriters don't exist in that world. They have a compulsory licensing system. Other people, of course, objected to Google Books because of the right of integrity, that they didn't like the idea that there was this robot being created that would deal with their books selectively and choose snippets based on certain words. And certainly the right to control publication of your work is implicated in this kind of wholesale use and display. Rights of attribution, of course, are important to authors too. It's rare to steal an entire novel and have somebody put his or her name on it. But poets and essayists are, in this world of rampant plagiarism, of course, often exposed to that. But all of these concepts seem to me to remain very much relevant to the discussion of the author's place in the world, too.
Okay, thank you. So I think I'm hearing a couple of different themes throughout this panel. One is that it's very hard to separate the concept of moral rights from the concept of economic rights, especially in situations where your reputation has a lot to do with the economic value of what you're producing. And I'm also hearing that there seems to be a lot of consensus here that attribution is a relatively important moral right for creators and for authors. But what I thought was interesting, and we first started getting into with Sean's discussion, is sort of the more reputational and other sort of personal importance of moral rights. And so I would like to hear a little bit more from some of the panelists, if they'd like to speak on it, about, putting aside economic rights. Not that you have to eat, obviously, economic rights are important, but how do things like, for example, Tom Petty being listed as the author of your song sort of impact you on a more reputational or personal level? Anyone want to take that on?
Well, I'll say that a lot of people thought that we were playing a cover after that, which lowered our sort of status in some weird way. So, I mean, that was one of the things. But, a lot of people object to the uses of their songs in, certain kinds of commercials and things like that. And these are, I know this is like rights of publicity and they cross into other realms. I'm pretty relaxed about all that. I mean, if the San Francisco Giants started using one of my songs, I'd have a problem with that. But
What about politicians?
well, I'm generally, if they stay away from homophobia, racism, certain key things, we have very diverse political views in both of our bands, so we kind of let more use of that happen than most bands. Am I being neutral enough?
Very middle.
Yes. So, but that's an issue. I don't know. Maybe.
Well, I mean, I
think
can't.
we're an odd collective for musicians. So.
I'm more speaking for friends of mine. I mean, as far as going back to thinking, I hate to bring it back to attribution, even though you're trying to take it somewhere else. But a bunch of friends of mine, I mean, have been sampled multiple times. Mm-hmm. And it would be very nice for people to know that they are the actual people that are playing on that record, on the original songs. It would be nice for people to know who the people who did the original songs were in a more comprehensive way, simply because thinking particular of a friend of mine who played on the Edwin Birdsong song that Daft Punk sampled. Those guys are all still around. They could have just easily hired those guys to come play the song again, and it would have been better for everybody. So it bleeds into the whole what is creative and what isn't. Because to me, in 2016, a lot of these things that people default to as creativity tactics, they default to because a certain legal mechanism was set up that drove things down a road that was the road that it went down because that was the one that was the clear one. I think if some other paths are cleared up, we'll see different kinds of creativity and we'll see different kinds of income generation even. And as far as effect on reputation, yes, and it's interesting because now I'm thinking of some other people I know who actually are in a position to be able to control their catalogs, and they've been pretty adamant about pretty adamant about policing use and making sure that people, hip hop songs that they don't approve of their music doesn't get on them, and I can also think of quite a few people, as David alluded, it goes into right of publicity. It starts to bleed into right publicity. But I know many people who have refused to let their songs be used in commercials, for example. And I know that that's an issue now for quite a few friends of mine because of YouTube and because of the fact that now they spent their whole career saying no to commercials, and now whenever the commercial pops up, they have no control over, which is off topic to this conversation, but it's the basic idea of, yes, you do spend, if your career was built on, okay, you have a certain level of integrity, and now that's being assaulted, then the reason that people respected you as an artist starts to go away, and it makes you less valuable. It makes you less valuable to your people and less valuable to yourself.
So I'm going to add, and again, maybe I'm just off base because again, I'm not as talented as these guys. So my perspective, it might be why I never became a famous musician. But so first, one is a small side note. I love the idea again about knowing where the samples come from, and just to plug a hometown radio station in Seattle, KEXP, did a deconstruction of Paul's Boutique, where they took an entire programming day and went through the songs and pulled out and played the original entire song that was sampled, and then gave the credit, maybe not to necessarily every musician on the original, but they got as close as you could get. So, that's incredibly important. That was cool to happen. What I think I was trying to get at, though, with this kind of final release of the Artifact and Nod is a lot of what I think you both are talking about with integrity is thinking about, using your song for political reasons, things like that. But what I'm really trying to get at is you're still, I think, perhaps thinking about the final release that you authorize and then what happens with it after that. So let me give a hypothetical. You signed over all your rights to a label, not to make the label the bad guy or anything, but you signed over, no, really, I'm really not trying to do that. I'm just saying for the hypothetical, you gave all your rights away, you had a bunch of stuff that you're in the studio, it wasn't quite up to par that you would have released, and now they say, the contract is, you're doing something else, and they say, okay, we're going to release from the archives, and it's a bunch of stuff you're like, I never would have released that. So that's in some ways what I'm trying to get at. What do you think about that?
Well, just on the never released, I was known for back in the day for being the guy who would derail a contract for those kind of things. So for me, I think in my whole career I've definitely done less than 5 works for hire, and I think it's 2 or 3 maximum. I just don't do it. That's me personally. But it's interesting because I kind of wanted to leave that alone, but since we're coming back to it, it's the copyright versus moral rights thing. Copyright is for everybody else. Moral rights is for us. When I make something, it's mine until you know about it.
We would hope.
From the standpoint of an artist, it's literally a piece of property. It's not, it becomes virtual property once it's printed. But when I'm thinking about it, it's mine. So it's kind of 2 different conversations. To me, when we're talking about copyright, we're talking about, okay, what happens when everybody else starts to know about it? But the real basic thing that is called moral rights, that's kind of intrinsic. And we make an agreement with the rest of y'all that we're going to give some of those up so y'all can hear it. But at the end of the day, we try to figure out ways to put it back in the contract. There's some guys like me who just won't do work for hire. Everybody's not as militant about it as I am, and that's one reason I don't work in LA, blah, blah, blah. That is what it is. I don't, but
Yeah.
It's something, it definitely impacts the creativity of this country. That's real. I just got to leave it at that.
And just so one last thing to close the loop on that. So that for me is Statute of Anne and our earlier Copyright Act where, there was the stronger public-private divide. The idea was you create something, you can control it completely until it is ready to be released because, I think you're hearing Melvin, and perhaps David agrees too, it's very personal. And until that thing is ready, you do not want it getting out there.
So I actually have a question for Yoko. Are these types of issues ones that are important to the photographers that Getty Images works with? Do you, help them enforce rights of attribution in addition to, obviously, the initiatives that Getty has come up with to try to embed and provide for social sharing? But are these types of concerns like, I really don't want my photograph appearing on this type of website or in this type of concept
The integrity issues are really interesting, particularly because we really sit and broker the relationship between the artists and and essentially the people licensing or purchasing content, and we handle it contractually, as you would imagine. But the stock photography industry is built on somebody takes your picture and customizes it and modifies it and uses it in a way that suits their particular need, eliminating the need to shoot custom content. But, what comes with that is obviously these absolutely human, personal decisions and opinions and thoughts about what is and is not acceptable. We're pretty clear about those conversations with our contributing photographers around, we asked, you really aren't able to exercise your moral rights with respect to particular uses. Yes, we have mechanisms to say, okay, no use in tobacco, no use in alcohol. We have the ability and the means to honor those types of restrictions. But once you really put it out into the distribution sort of ecosystem, there is this understood, exchange, a contractual exchange around what you can or can't control. And notwithstanding sort of an open dialogue and transparency about that, you just never know what's really going to hit you and what's quite personal. And we've seen some really interesting issues come up. And we do have to deal with those on a one-off basis and try to find that middle ground. And sometimes that means that photographer wants to pull content. But if a campaign is run, a campaign is run. So you do see those, and we do sort of stand in the middle, again, trying to broker what is the best solution for each side here. And I think it's really, people are so creative, you just can never know what they're going to come out with. And maybe absolutely offensive to some, it may not be. And I mean, it is sort of what makes it interesting. But again, to that private public, we just sort of wait in the middle and see what happens. But what I'll go back to is really, I do think technology has solutions to offer in this space that have yet to be really fully explored. And when we talk about control, and when I think about online, it really truly is the reflection of those control mechanisms within the ones and O's. So I'm not sure if that answers that question, Kim.
So does anyone else on the panel have thoughts about sort of ways to manage these issues, about solutions, or is it just a problem that is inherent in the nature of internet distribution?
Well, I mean, I feel like sometimes we framed the whole question wrong. Like we're sort of worrying about the rights of like a group of consumers or an industry or a preferred technology. But rights only vest in the individual. And I don't think me asserting my rights, if it breaks or wrecks a certain technology, then it wasn't a good enough technology in the first place, and it should die. I mean, think about what we lose. I mean, well, how did we get this turned around so backwards that we have to pick winners and losers in the technology world? If the internet is the most wonderful thing ever, it should be able to withstand me asserting my moral rights, right?
Well, I mean, the thing I always say is that, this idea that information should be free theoretically also applies to your bank information. But nobody has any problem with having their bank information locked down. So it becomes a question of going back to what I said earlier, what people want to build, what people need to build. It's not theoretically, as Yoko said earlier, her pictures go up with the metadata on, and then magically the metadata disappears. So the fact that happens is because there was nothing built
We allowed it to happen.
to allow it to remain. Or, I don't want to put it the other way, but, the implication is there. So I think that, as I said earlier, there are going to have to be some affirmative forcing of people's hands to to enforce community, unfortunately, because people are just going to build according to what they can get away with building.
So Scott, you've been kind of quiet. Do you have any concluding thoughts before we go to audience questions?
Again, I'm sitting here thinking about all of these issues as they apply to authors. And of course, you know, our problems have to do with theft, piracy, which is, I'm sure, a problem across the board. And I'm also thinking about the fact that it would probably behoove us, those who try to be authors' representatives, as well as authors, to explain this in the personal terms, which I think moral rights implicate, and the way, you know, Melvin's been talking about it. That you know, yes, it's property. You're stealing property, but it's property plus. Creative work always has been, and moral rights recognizes that plus aspect to creative work. And I think it's important because it's not just being ripped off by the pirate. It's the personal insult that goes with it. Because, you know, look, my books are in the library. People can go read them for free. And I love that. But that's because I chose to participate in that system. And I didn't choose to participate in a system where somebody else is going to take control of my work.
Okay, so we have about 10 minutes for audience questions.
I have a question for Scott. How do you feel about fan fiction?
I think it's pretty interesting, personally. And you know, you can't deal with this globally. It depends on, you know, exactly what is being done and what exactly is being appropriated, and then what kind of use gets made of it. But what I like about the moral rights discussion is that it involves us in discussing the spiritual element of creative work. I know when I write something that it's going to be meaningful, I hope, to an audience, and that they're going to take it in and make use of that imaginative experience in their own way. So fan fiction is part of that process. Again, it's complicated, and it becomes particularly complicated if somebody's trying to make economic use of something that I want to control. But, you know, the notion of it appeals. It actually does appeal to me.
I want to just kind of tag on to Scott's comments a little bit. I mean, it seems people have to remember that we all started off learning, and we all started off, you know, copying other people. Creative people in general are not against emulation. We're not against remix. We're not against any of that. What we're against is this distance that's been put in between us and the community of people who would want to emulate us. You know, it's like the person who taught me how to play bass, I learned, you know, I was copying him. But then I was going to his house every week. You know, the people that, you know, I was listening to their records to, you know, there was a relationship beyond just, okay, there's a website and the website is scraping my data. And I think that's, to solve that, we kind of have to go backwards. And that's why I think the moral rights conversation is actually applicable in this era.
Question for David and Melvin. As I'm sure you know, Section 115 of the Copyright Act provides for a compulsory license that once you've written a song, that anyone else, without your permission, can go ahead and record a cover version. do you like that? Does it bother you? Do you think
Okay.
it bothers most songwriters,
It's
composers?
about to get all Worldwide Wrestling Federation up in here now. It's two things that don't go together. I mean, I'm of two minds of this. I mean, our organization is pro-compulsory license. The reason we are pro-compulsory license, but there is a very strong caveat with that, which from our end, the issue is that there has to be fair market rate paid when a piece of our creativity is used. The reason that I can support that is because, as I was saying earlier, we all start off learning from other people. And for me, it balanced in the context of American culture. I hate to bring that up, I hate to separate. I feel that it allows for creativity. Having said that, I 100% understand. I am 100% for autonomy. And in a perfect universe, I think that I would probably go a different way. But with the laws that we have now and the way this country is structured, our organization feels that compulsory is what we would support.
What was the section of that act? I mean, I feel pretty much the same way Melvin does. I mean, I think people forget, though, you can cover a song in a venue and it's covered by a blanket license, and in theory, that whole process was, until the DOJ stepped in, it was largely took place in the private market, right? I see that there are other countries that don't have compulsory licenses, but that have private market solutions or free market, more or less, solutions to trying to license, compulsories for covers and stuff like that. The problem with the compulsory license is the economic problem. I think most people don't mind having their songs covered. So I'm against the compulsory license because it's essentially a subsidy mostly because it ends up being a subsidy for winners that the government has picked in advance, technology companies, even large media companies previously. So I would rather not have it.
Okay, I think this is going to be our last question.
Thanks. I'd like to ask you the question that I was asked at the end of my talk before lunch, which is, you've spoken eloquently about what moral rights mean for you, but how is that in the public interest?
I don't know if moral rights, how is it in the public interest?
So the question that I was asked at the end of my talk is, it's very nice, all the things you say about attribution rights, but what's in it for the public? The implication of the question being that there's an opposition between the interest of the author in being recognized and the economic benefits that might flow from that, as well as the psychological benefits, but to the extent that attribution rights might make the dissemination of the work more difficult because you get bogged down in trying to find out who is the author and identify the author, so we have less dissemination of the work to the public. What's the argument from the author, as an author, right? I gave the law professor answer.
Okay.
Pretty good answer.
What, as authors, can you say about why recognizing you as the creators of your work, why is that good for the public in general?
Can I take a quick swipe at that one? I believe that all of the rules and laws we have are aimed at stimulating creative activity. And if your work can be taken without attribution, it, to some, is going to be a disincentive to doing it. And again, you know, as somebody who's privileged to have a wide readership and who doesn't pass a day without getting fan mail, you know, I feel blessed by that, by the relationship that I've entered into with all of those people. And if you told me, leaving aside the, you know, incredible good fortune financially that I've also enjoyed, that could be taken away from me because attribution would no longer be required, that would be a huge loss. It would change the meaning of authorship, and I'm sure for many authors and other creators that it's a disincentive. If you're saying that there are certain mishaps in the internet world that we all know about where attribution gets lost, that's one thing. But if you're saying that attribution in general is no longer going to be a right that we value, I truly believe that you have diminished the glory of authorship.
I'll take a slightly different crack, if I could, at that, which is, I agree with that, but I also think that what it gets you is it gets you that public sphere, that public discourse. And that's what I was trying to really hone in on today, is that, you know, we had at times in the past, Professor Ginsburg knows, you know, that with a lot of the scientific societies, going back into the early scientific revolution, and yes, copyright was important on the science side, not just creative arts, it was a lot manuscript culture, things being circulated privately, and partly because people weren't ready to take that stand and they needed some other incentives to do it. So what does moral rights and attribution get you? Well, it's what copyright gets you as well. It gets people putting their stuff out there, publicly releasing it, not necessarily free economically, but putting it out there so it could be a robust public discourse.
I would tag onto that. I mean, it's going somewhere that I wouldn't rarely go in public and going a little Darwinian. I think that if in attribution, you might actually have a situation where the best people win. I mean, there are a lot of, I talked to a couple of friends of mine who are professional ghostwriters. Nobody was willing to go, nobody really wanted to share. So I'm just going to have to riff on my own on this. But, I mean, ghostwriting is not a new thing. I mean, but who knows? Who knows if the person who actually was painting for Rembrandt, maybe that's the person who should have been famous. We'll never, because we don't have attribution, we'll never really know. I think, and in the context of the music business, the way the music business in 2016, I know that a lot of people go uncredited that are propping up a lot of other people's careers. And I think that it would be better for the people of the world if some of these talented people actually got to get up from under these other people and got known for what they were doing. It would make the music world better. It just would.
You mean the change a word, earn a third? Yeah. Quote, did you know? Well.
Okay, well, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much to all of our panelists.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.